So I want to talk about what I think is one of the core major problems in the comic industry, maybe the core central problem. And it to me, so many problems stem off of this. And so we can attack the other individual little problems, or we can attack the core. Now, by the way, if you're listening to this going, man, this is going to be negative, it's not. This is recognizing a problem and then trying to offer up a solution. So I'm going to talk about the problem, some of its causes, but then I'm going to get to the solution because I think there is an obvious solution. And I think as we kind of work around the edges, we never actually get to the core problem, which, if we just focused on it, might be easy to solve. But to me, the core underlying root of the problem is that in comics today, by and large, the creators do not have a connection to the success of the product. Let me explain. Hey everybody, this is Perch. We talk about a lot of things going on in comics, ways it can be better, ways that are problems. But to me, there's kind of one underlying core problem that really everything else orbits around. And you see it, and why I think you can see it fairly clearly is in the big two, and certainly other companies where the creators are hired or contracted to do work. There is a major disconnect between the creator and actually the success of the product they're working on, beyond what I would call soft values, soft skills. So, for example, if you take a look at a guy, I mean, throwing four names out of it, I mean, like Greg Pak, Matt Rosenberg, Sean Gordon Murphy. You know, I'd get to the four. There are others. There's many others. People who actually, I think, care about what happens to the comics they work on. They will promote, they will push, they will reach out to shops, they will reach out to customers or fans, and they're very, very different people, very different personalities, but they seem invested in the comic being a success. But the reality is, for their big two work, their investment is capped. Sure, maybe these people are all bright enough to realize it's in their self-interest to have a successful comic career, therefore they're contracted for more work. But if Matt Rosenberg goes out there and triples the sales for a title he's on, he doesn't get a dime more. Now maybe he gets considered for future work because he's considered a strong seller, but other than that, there's no stock, there's no bonus, there's no additional incentive. It's kind of because he's a nice guy, because he's trying to do the right thing. And that's great. And my hat is off to those people. But by and large, in the comics industry, there's not a heavy incentive to actually see a book through for success. And yes, there are creator-owned books at Image and other places. And yes, people can go do crowdfunding, but crowdfunding is a very different beast. And I'll get to that in a minute. But even at Image, so take a look at, for example, Rick Remender. Rick Remender is doing Scumbag right now. And as the election has gotten near to kind of its end point, its destination point, Remender has gotten more feisty, let's say, about the election. And in particular, has blatantly asked people who are voting for Trump not to buy his stuff. I don't want your dollars. I don't want you involved. Get out, basically. And on one hand, you might say, "Hey, here's a guy. It's his own creator-owned book. So if it succeeds, if it fails, or sorry, he gives away 40% of his business because he's isolated that part of the population, and it's on him, right? I mean, he's putting less money in his pocket, but that's his problem." But the challenge is this: even outside of the big two, even with creator-owned work that are going through a publisher, there's still a disconnect between the end customer and the creator. And the reality is, if you're, say, a Rick Remender, you know that a lot of the comic shops are going to order your comic. Image is putting some promotion behind it. A lot of comic shop owners who are doing their orders are not really thinking about each individual title. They're kind of going where the marketing dollars are and what's being promoted to them, especially when they get, to Image and some of those groups. And Remender's name sells. So they're they're basically going to order what they think they can recognize. And in many cases, you're hoping that the comic shop has a good, connection with its customer base, but in many cases, it doesn't. Now, that's a different problem. It absolutely should. But if you think about it, basically, when some of the creators go off on Twitter or social media and really angrily isolate, you know, I mean, even if it was 20%, even if it was 1/5 of their audience, that's a huge, huge impact to a title. But they're not thinking of it that way. They're thinking about the comic shops. They're thinking about it in terms of my comic is selling to the comic shop. The comic shop then has to turn around and sell it to the customer. But a lot of creators aren't thinking that far ahead. They're thinking very short term, and to them, whether if they insult their customer base, it really doesn't matter. And that's why you've heard people say, creators say, "Hey, I've seen no dip in my comic sales after I acted like a crazy person." Whether you hate Trump or in theory you don't see a lot of it, but you see a creator going off on Biden, same thing. They'll say, I don't really see a drop in my sales. Well, yeah, of course not, because your sales are going to the comic shop. And comic shops are not in a position to take ideological stances. They're just going to try and supply as best they can to their consumers. Now, some comic shops will say, I'm not carrying DC, or I'm not carrying this creator or that creator. But typically speaking, the comic shop is in a direct into customer market. They're at that last stage where they just need to, basically get product in, sell product out. And so them saying, I'm okay taking a 40% haircut on a title, that doesn't work. Most comic shops do not have the margin or the ability to do that. A couple might, but most don't. And frankly, this is the big kind of joke in comic shops. There's been a couple of shops out there, like Big Bang, for example, that have gone out and said things like, screw the, right wing and other things. But they know their customer base. They know their customer base is 90% one ideology. And and by the way, because I'm in those retailer groups, they will go ahead and buy these comics. I mean, the funny thing is when there was that big fuss about the Jawbreakers title a while back in Antarctic Press, and some comic shops, again a very small amount, said I would never carry that. Even many of those that said I wouldn't carry it turned around later and said, well, if a customer asked for it, I would still order it for them. And the reality is, if the title was going to sell well, their ideology would stop in a hurry. There's only one comic shop on the planet that I know of that actually manages their business that way, and it's a boutique, place down in San Francisco, and they do what they want, and they're funded that they can do what they want, but most don't. But kind of backing up a second, the challenge you have here is that if you're kind of relying on the honor system or people just being kind of nice people, that's a broken system. The comic publishers, the people who are making these comics, have to find a better way to connect the dots from the creator to the end customer with incentive to do well. If right now you could wave a magic wand and say, okay, here's a profit sharing plan that if a title sells above 10,000 copies, you start getting a percentage of that profit at the big two. If you suddenly put that in place, you would be shocked at how fast some of the behavior would change on social media, because it would be hitting your wallet. Now, not for all. There's certainly some people out there who are comfortable making what they're making, and they're okay. They've got their lifestyle buttoned up the way they like, and they don't really care about that extra money, or they're too dumb to realize they could get it. Either way, doesn't really matter. But the majority, if there was an incentive to actually, promote the book and do well, and a lot of, I mean, the crazy part is the amount of creators who are kind of assumed by the publisher they're going to promote themselves. They're just going to take that extra burden on their own, and it's their problem. It's shocking. It's shocking to me how many publishers just assume that's going to happen, and then if the creator's too successful with it, we'll turn around and tell them not to do it because you're making somebody else look bad. The creators overall are disincentivized to actually promote and support the books they're working on. And so it's hardly a shock when the creators come in and they isolate parts of the fan base and they're angry and and whatever else when they do these things. And you see the customers, the fans, come in and go, well, you're not getting my dollar. And the creator's like, I really don't care. Because the reality is they don't. It doesn't matter. Not to all of them. Again, not to even the majority of them. But when you see that kind of reaction, it's like, yeah, because if you take your dollars away, nothing changes for them at all. And I think that's unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the creators. I think they should be able to share in a successful book. So I think they should get some of the back end. And I think it's unhealthy for the culture of comics because it basically sets up the environment where, you can go out and say crazy things and do whatever you want. And somebody else will take the burden of that. I do think there's something significantly broken where, in many cases, the creators with Image and other places where there is some creator owned stuff, they're basically playing to the comic shops. And in some cases, they're not even doing that very well, but they know that when they reach a certain standpoint in their career, they can basically act however they want. Comic shops are probably still going to order their stuff. They're going to still get their minimum. And, nothing else matters. And if the comic shop is stuck with a bunch of, extra comics that they can't sell, it's not their problem. The crazy part is a lot of comic shops will sit there and they'll see, I remember a lot of comic shops in my area having stacks and stacks of Fear Itself that the event that just did not sell. And they're like, oh man, Matt Fraction shouldn't be put on an event. It's too early. He's not selling. And then Marvel announces another Matt Fraction book and they all order high. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? Because you just had the evidence that maybe the demand for that particular writer isn't as strong as what you're ordering for. And the answer was, yeah, but people recognize his name. So, I ordered. And it's like, and sure enough, a couple months later, it's like, oh, I got stacks of comics again. It's like, that's part of the problem. So I'm not absolving kind of the comic shops or anybody else. I mean, this is a broken system. But like I said at the very beginning, the core of this, the heart, is that you've detached the motivation for creators to actually benefit from books. And I think by doing that, you've created a very, very broken system. By the way, this would solve a lot of the networking and the click kind of behavior as well, because if you're an editor and you've got some level of profit sharing of the books that you're working on, and then you keep hiring kind of your buddies that can't move comics, that's going to change your mood in a hurry. You're going to start hiring in people who can actually move titles because it hits your wallet. But if you disconnect, basically if you detach the success or failure of the product they're working on, then what do you expect? Again, there are people out there, and they're good people, and I think these are admirable people who will promote things because it's just the right thing to do, who will put that extra energy into things because they know that, that is their job. There's a work ethic involved there. But this is the exception in a lot. Well, no, sorry, I've gone back and forth on that. I don't know. I can't give you an exact percentage of what's happening. All I do know is over time, I personally am seeing less and less engagement at that level, but it corresponds with less and less, upside to a title when it's successful. And again, on the indie market, when it is creator owned, there's still a gap between the consumer, the customer, and the creator. The creator has a buffer between them. That's a comic shop, and that blunts kind of how they're going to engage. Now, I mentioned very briefly crowdfunding. How is crowdfunding different? Well, crowdfunding is direct to consumer. And I think that is a case where you are seeing definitely and it's not like behaving a certain way, because with crowdfunding, it's far more tactical, far more strategic. If you are doing a crowdfunding book, you have to figure out how to reach an audience. And that audience can be left wing, it can be right wing, it can be YA, it can be LGBTQ, it can be whatever it happens to be. But as long as you're able to reach that audience and penetrate it well, then you will be successful. So you do see a lot of creators who come on there and they figure out how to talk to that audience and they make a lot of money. What we haven't seen terribly too much of is a creator can come on and talk to all audiences. And you might argue that may not even be the goal. That may not even be something to strive for, because you can come out and really target an audience that can net you $1 million. You call good is good. Going for a homogenous product that's going to appeal to everyone, given how polarized we are as a society, might wind up, basically appealing to nobody. You can kind of tip the other direction. That is a problem. But with crowdfunding, it is far more, and that's why, by the way, you've seen some creators who are big two creators who discover that kind of their approach does not work as successfully. I mean, I can't begin to tell you the amount of creators who come in and say, I don't understand how EVS made more money than I do. I'm a bigger name. And you're like, yeah, but he's figured out this audience will pay him. And so he's marketing and he's talking to that audience very, very strategically, very tactfully, and tactfully. Anyway, he's pinpointing that audience and he's getting it. Whereas you're coming out and you're kind of taking a big two approach, but it's a completely different market and it's not going to have the same result. But anyway, what do you think? Is this a core problem? Do I have it all right or do I have it all wrong? Let me know in the comments below. To me, I think if you fix this one problem, there would be dominoes that would fix a ton more. But let me know if I'm wrong or right, whatever you like, in the comments below. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications. I'm trying to think of it. Send me an email, follow me on social media. Most importantly, thanks for listening.